G'day guys, James Newbury here with Matt Legg. We have an awesome guest today on podcast episode number 12 of the Phyba Performance Podcast. We're going to be talking all things mushrooms with Mason from SuperFeast. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm already like, you're so giggly. I can tell like this is going to be such a fun chat.
Oh, no, we're excited, yeah.
And how long has it been? Like,
Dude, forever and ever. Like the thing is with this, I've been wanting so bad to get in the same room with Mason for years and years and years. And now I've finally got two guys who I think are long lost brothers in a different life somewhere in the same room. So I think we'll blow the socks off a bunch of people with some cool stuff about holistic health, mushrooms, how to get the most out of the body, what they can do for us. There's going to be such cool knowledge thrown around here, and especially in terms of performance, spirituality, foraging for cool stuff, and actually getting ingredients that we know are going to enhance the lives of so many people, and talking about that. So we can kind of I think we just open it up with maybe Mason, tell us a little bit about your journey, and you can kind of fast forward through certain parts, but how did you get onto mushrooms? Why were they such a big passion of yours? And then we can get onto some things like, okay, what are some struggles that you found in creating SuperFeast, which is a brand that I've been so attached to for so long, just wanting to get the most out of my body in the most natural way possible. So give us a little bit of rundown on your background, how you got into SuperFeast, and what you're doing now.
Fun. I'm going to go nice and fast through the story. I mean, I was traveling in my early 20s, and I took a year off uni before my last year, and I just had one of the, during that trip, there were people I was coming across who were breath workers and yogis, and people just who were like getting deep into into foraging, so on and so forth. I was not in that phase where I was ready to like let that kind of information in, but kind of left a little seed, and I had a moment in Bolivia. I kind of dropped into my body, and it was probably the core idea that eventually became SuperFeast, and everything that I'm doing is I just felt a split in the road, and it was like one road I could feel the general intent and energy was crossing my fingers and really hoping that nothing bad would happen, and the other would be taking a whole lot of weight, a lot of harrowing weight on, and really having a little bit of the, the driver's seat action, which a lot of people, you guys know that feeling. And it took me back to when I was like 14. I remember I was sitting in the car with my mum on the way to school, and I was hearing like 1 in 2 people have cancer, and 1 in 3 men are getting diabetes. I remember sitting there not thinking about myself, and going, oh my gosh, I really hope my parents aren't one of those. And it was just such a shitty feeling, and it was such a institutionalized, like reducing something which is like so incredible, the human body, and like, human civilization to statistics. I can get the smidge of a situation where it's appropriate, but it's such an inappropriate way to look at life. And I felt that and felt that other fork in the road when I was in Bolivia. So I got back and just dove into the deep end of, well, for me at that time, it was raw foodism, going and getting my own spring water, deep cleansing. Like I had symptoms going on, but I was just like not interested in healing those symptoms. I was just like feeling at the time those beginnings of like, where does it go? What path do I track towards 80 years old and 90 years old?
Yeah.
Like, is that track like a concrete one? Is it one that like is straight? Or is it one that kind of acknowledges there's no such thing as a real straight line and kind of follows some ley lines as you go along and is mysterious? And
that's crazy interesting, man, because, I mean, for you to order, were you always into, like, natural medicine? Because for you, a lot of people get these, same sort of triggers with, there's cancer in the family, or there's potential of cancer, there's this inevitable death that we're working towards. And then they go towards this science aspect with these like high-tech nutraceuticals or these full-on complex, or looking at genes and things like that. But you went back to nature. So you went to water foraging, back to nature, back to the earth, in amongst the dirt and that sort of stuff. So is that something you were always into, or is that?
It's funny. There's a quote, because we've talked about spring water so many times. There's a quote. There's something I realized. My dad passed away 2 years ago, and there was something, when he passed, I was like, you were holding on to something. You couldn't fully express it, but there was something that was so precious that you wanted to hand over to me and my brother, and I could feel it just via osmosis for 2 weeks there, him being on his deathbed, just those final moments of him. Couldn't quite acknowledge it, but he was just like, this is all I can say. He was like putting his body over the grenade of one aspect of like the lineage while going, there's such treasure here and I don't know how to express it, but you got to take it. And you can feel it coming over into me and my brother. I mean, this, you know, he was an incredible, incredible bushman, you know, sailor, you know, Queen Scout, you know, he was like literally a samurai, like literally a black belt, 6-dan black belt in Japanese jiu-jitsu. And I remember him, you know, saying to me like we'd have to, you know, like I'd be talking about the, you know, the spiritual beliefs that I was kind of like exploring, becoming a yoga teacher. And, you know, I like the kind of like, you know, the real classical yogic and Taoist form of spirituality one, you know, that never created, can't be destroyed, so on and so forth. We are one, but we're also sovereign in eternity, so on and so forth. Like it's kind of like Star Wars, you know, kind of Star Wars Taoism. It's fun. And then that excited me, you know, and that kind of, but my dad was just like, oh, look, you know what? For me, the most spiritual moment is when I'm on the dog run, locking the dogs up. That's what he had, security dog company, and the sun comes up, and I'll pull the car over and I'll nod to the sunrise. So there was something that really was getting passed over in the middle of this concrete jungle, and I want to read this quote because you've got me going back to it. I read it 13 years ago, and I just posted on Instagram. I'm like, I think this quote kind of saved my life in some way because I was in the jaws of university. Not that I, you know, disagree with university, you know, as an but for me, my body really disagreed with it. Like it was like I had this, you know, again, this isn't my stuff. This isn't about the institution itself, but my inappropriateness have been there when I was like, I got back from Bolivia and I started diving into like, you know, potentiation or whatever you want to call it. I got this revulsion of what was infiltrating my body and infesting.
What were you studying?
I started off studying international business and had some really cool subjective subjects which I was like really excited about, and then like got back from my degree and they cancelled my degree even though they were running it the last year. This is just what I needed because I can really have fun with my spitefulness and really run with it and create businesses and create, you know, and still have fun. Like this is why I got into stand-up comedy recently, because I want to be able to keep on hitting these little pain points I've had. And so I got back and they were like, oh, you can't get back in. I'm like, it's literally running. You can let me back in. I know it's the last year. And they were like, sorry, we're an institution. We're like old and crusty and we're just straight lines. Yeah, policy. So the policy is like a toxic mimic. The way policies work right now, they're so black and white and boxed, which is ultimately they're so defensive of them in say like in a hierarchical business. And a hierarchical business is such a poor structure to put around a seed idea, a beautiful idea. The Taoists would, you know, say humans are here to bridge heaven and earth. So as far as I can see, there's like, you know, some infinite love out there that we're all kind of like swimming in, whether no matter what your belief is, even as in a complete atheist belief, it's just like you can feel the love, whatever it is, you know, pulsating around us, and love bridging down here into this 3D reality with all these resources, and we're trying to figure out how that can maybe come manifest. Oh, that didn't work. Oh, that kind of works, and this is bringing us together, and this is fun, or that's harrowing, so on and so forth. That policy is such a poor way to talk about it. I don't mind the word, but in my business, I talk about policy just being like regulating chi. So it's a part of the ecosystem that supports like, you can't act that way, but you don't, it's not like that's like going to completely stop you. It's more like a bunda in yoga. It's just redirecting the energy over there so it doesn't pour out. And a policy that's like, no, bad worker, don't do that, you're not allowed to. It's just like someone's not doing it. Like someone's jumping onto Facebook because they hate you and your business. That's not a good thing to leave festering in your business. That's valid criticism. And everyone, so that's why I kind of go to SuperFeast, watching the homogenization. Like we're going through boom, 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 mushroom boom, adaptogen boom, all that kind of stuff. And you can feel you're just trying to keep up with like, without having no idea what I'm, you know, doing in business, despite doing, I got back and did this. They were like, all right, now you're in a commerce degree. And I was like, oh my God, this sucks. This like the most 2-minute noodle marketing like thing in third year business degree. It was such a travesty. I really love how I was like, I am so bitter towards this institution. I loved it. It gave me so much. And now I've learned how to not gain momentum based on pushing off other things I disagree with, or institutions, whether it's modern medicine, whether it's universities, whether it's crusty bureaucracies or whatever it is. Like I know that that's a very, very, very disempowering way, but in your early 20s, that's what you do. You bounce off things, and that's how you get momentum. And you're like, oh, actually I'm now relying on making other things wrong and making myself right in order to get momentum, and then I'm sacrificing actually cultivating my own capacity to move through space and time, which is like really fun. But I walked out of that degree flipping at the bird going, I'm going to give people as much of an opportunity who shouldn't be in institutions like this, an opportunity to realize that you've got your claws into them and you will not commodify them and you will not. It's so such cool. A fun.
Well, mine was naturopath. So mine very similar because I did a naturopath degree. But I did naturopath. I mean, we were talking earlier that I grew up obsessed with like Bush Tucker Man, Malcolm Douglas. It was all hunting, gathering, foraging, survival. And I used to read a lot of these books like Magician and these Raymond E. Feast books, all these like kind of cool things. It was all about the herbalist and the poultice and the magicians and all that sort of stuff. And I used to be obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci and all these sort of things as well. So then I went to become a naturopath, but I went into this naturopath course and there was no botany, there was no identification, there was no actual herbs that we would pick or grow. There was no ability for me to... And it's still to this day, you know, I still haven't worked out how to identify most of these herbs. I don't have the ability to just walk out into the bush. All the things that I wanted to become a naturopath for, I was thinking it was going to be like a herbalist. Like I was going to learn how to be a herbalist and I was going to learn how to identify things, how to grow things, how to make things. But the problem was the course was taken over by business, you know, so we'd learn mineral therapy by the company that supplied the minerals. We'd learn herbal medicine from the companies that supply the herbal supplements. And then we'd learn nutraceuticals from the nutraceutical suppliers. It was designed very similar to what I would imagine a medical degree or something like that, where we're diagnosing and prescribing. Like we learned how to diagnose and prescribe. And I was the same. I was getting all bitter. I was getting dirty. It's like, where's the naturopathic part of this? And all I wanted to do was get out of uni, grab my piece of paper, go home to where I was and go back out into the bush and learn from the people that actually were touching the stuff and growing the stuff and learn more from the people actually having a crack. And then I wanted to have a crack myself, just, you know, doing these sort of things. And an interesting thing you said before is like with all of these things, there's that sliding doors moment. Do I go bitter and like, screw you, that's dodgy, I'm going down this path? Or there's that belief system that I have that, you know, there is no darkness, it's only absence of light. You know, so wherever we see these things that are going down a tainted pathway or where they're running down, you know, the commercial stuff gets too commercial, the naturopathic stuff gets pretty much pharmaceutical, that's because of that lack of light and illumination and energy and love. So love and light will fill up a space and darkness can't exist if you fill that space up with light. Like there is no darkness, that's just the absence of light. So that was a big belief system that I had that I then wanted to go through and got all crazy trying to educate people on this stuff and, you know, trying to, you know, force the light into areas of darkness, which they don't like.
No, it's an initiator. And darkness is fun. Like darkness, you get to like run around, like, you know,
like a ninja.
It's super fun. Yeah, like a ninja. It's an interesting thing. I mean, obviously, because what you're talking about is a commodification or a colonization of like a lineage, like a herbal lineage or a clinical lineage, you know, so on and so forth. And you could almost argue that when you look at the explosion of civilization, that it was the only thing that we could possibly do to even just keep up with some form of like keeping herbs available or keeping Chinese medicine available or keeping medicine available to the whole. And so although like TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, which is like people often think I fall into that category because the adaptogens that I got into, the medicinal mushrooms I got into, what I was really looking at when I was actually studying in my last year of uni, I was looking for all these things to find that magic. I want to find that herbal medicine. And so I found Chinese medicine. It kept on coming back though to these adaptogenic herbs, which what the Taoists would call the tonic herbs. Yep. And Taoism being like a nice old school earth and universe based philosophy, which is just like get in the flow so you can unfold. And in terms of like, you know, in terms of death, hopefully when you die, you do it heaps gracefully and it's like fun. You can like spring off into the next adventure whatever it is. Like, and so I was looking down the barrel of like, right, do I have imposter syndrome and I need to go and learn from this institution, which is a really valid thing that I could have done. I'm going to go and study Chinese medicine in a university, but just having gone through a university and seeing what they did to even something can be as beautiful as business. Like business can be something so incredible to take a source idea and organize a structure around it, as one of my team members said recently, because I kind of came in over the last year and a half going, right, now I'm going to consolidate everything and I'm going to make sure that we're grounded in a structure and that we're actually something that can survive decades into the future and not just be like randomly putting up scaffolding in order to meet, the demand that we're getting, and really guard this idea. And it disgruntled a lot of the team and some of the team, and they were the ones that actually weren't right for the magnitude of what the source idea was. They were great for a certain amount of time, so we had a good collaboration. But others that have been there for a while and get it, especially the ones you wouldn't expect to be working in the warehouse, like kind of like me, like the real beautiful trippers. They're the ones that were like, yeah, I can see what you're doing. You're building walls around the flower garden. Yeah. So when something like business is so incredible, when you look at it, something like that as an ability to build walls around like a flower garden, and then I watched what they did to it at university. I was just like, then looking at herbal medicine, and I was reading about Taoism, then I was reading about traditional Chinese medicine courses at university, and I'm like, there's no magic, there's no spirit of the organs, there's no shamanic earth medicine, there's no real studying of where the communion between humans and these herbs came from, or where the nature of yin yang really came from, and spending term after term or semester after semester really embodying the capacity to feel why they chose these words and terms yin yang to explain something like light and dark, and really living it, which is what you need to be a herbalist, what you need to be a classical Chinese healer or any kind of healer. You need to be able to have a capacity to realize that the relationship between biophilia, the aliveness of everything around you. Again, and you don't have to be an animist for that. Some of the most like hardcore scientists have spent so long in their discipline going through a decentralization of their minds, still staying in a scientific lineage, that they have this feeling-based communion with the elements and with the petri dish, and they can follow their intuition. It's like, oh my God, you're so incredible. How'd you do it? It's like, because they're in relation. And you need to be able to do that as a healer, and you don't get set up for that at all. I was watching this TCM going, there's no magic, there's no unity, there's no actual real healing. This is an out-of-the-box teaching, and then you go and talk to anyone that's been through those courses. Is it good? Yeah, it's pretty good. You get your piece of paper, then you have to go back and study the classics. Yeah. And I was like, am I willing to do this?
Because they teach you how to prescribe again. The same system, Western herbalism, TCM.
Well, TCM,
Ayurvedic,
what
it's
happened?
Symptom picture, and then prescribe this old formula without teaching the why and the how behind the disease.
Well, it's interesting what happened. TCM's a good example of what's happened in naturopathy as well. And it'd be interesting to go and get where it happened. There was there's a beautiful woman, Rhonda Chang. She's here in Australia. She's a Chinese woman studying in China. And she's got a book called Chinese Medicine Masquerading as EYI. And she goes and she shows you the moments when Mao Zedong decided to commodify Chinese medicine in the 1950s and create a new form of medicine, which has its own name, a new philosophy, cutting the spirit out, taking parts which can scale. Bad, good, don't care. It matched something, but it's a different medicine to the earth medicine and the universe medicine of Taoism and classical Chinese medicine. So it'd be nice to differentiate. If you want to study classical, well, you're either going to have two choices. Go the scallywag route, where you are a decentralized healer that doesn't have the certificate to officially give acupuncture and all this kind of stuff, or you go, I'm going to play the game, and it's going to take me longer. I'm going to go study TCM, and I'm all the while going to be studying the classics. Or afterwards, I'm going to go and make sure that I then gain the real education, de-educate myself, like uneducate myself of what I've been taught at university and go down that route. So that's what I was looking at. And then I was like, Taoist herbalism for the people, very gentle herbs. These are the herbs 2,000 years ago, Shen Nong's Defined Farmers Materia Medica, the Ben Cao Jing. We're just like, look, these are the herbs that can help slow degeneration. That's it. Slow degeneration, give you some core strength, keep you light, build the qi, and then hopefully help your heart open so you can feel the virtuous nature of yourself. It was so simple and so devastating that there was people out there kind of going, no, not allowed. We have the herbs. We keep the herbs. I was like, screw this. I'm going scallywag. And so I went down the route of scallywag herbalism. It's still, that's the way it was. It always was. What I've been able to do over the years with SuperFeast is one of the hardest parts of SuperFeast. You have like, the acupuncturists who are like so ensconced in their tower, in their ivory tower. I'm like, we disperse the herbs. You can't trust them with these people. These people are silly clients, and it's like, because they're focusing on And an obscure example of when someone who had extreme symptoms was going and trying to heal themselves when it was beyond their capacity, and they should have been going and seeing a practitioner, whereas these herbs are decentralized and they are there for people who are reasonably well or in a position where lifestyle practices are going to be able to restore their ability to thrive and not just leak their essence, leak their jing. That's the kidney essence. It helps us, expand and become 80-year-olds that don't have we're not just crusty and can hardly move and don't have a spine that can undulate at all. That's all strong jing stuff. And these herbs, like the jing herbs, they teach you that. You can feel when you take them, when you get onto it on a preventative route, you can feel this magical connection that they bring to your own kidney system and your own kidney water. And you start getting, what is this cultivation thing, this mystical, magical Taoist concept of cultivation? It's it's not just crossing your fingers and hope that the things you're doing are going to really get you to the point where not only you're not an asshole at 80, but you're well put together. And you had the essence to not only keep your marrow and your bones really strong and your knees and your hips and your lower back strong, that you can still, maybe charge up a hill, but you've had the fortitude at the baseline of your body. The spirit of the kidneys is the je, it's the will. You stay within your purview and your capacity, and as you do that, the spirit of the personality of that kidney water chi coming out is will. You have a willing desire to take on further responsibility, and you actually have the jing to really hold it and take it on. And as you do that, you're in a position where you have the will to kind of bite a little bit more off of life. And you watch all these people, all these traditions, the one thing they do have is the ability to go through these hardships in life to become rad people. Throw it again, throw another one at me, throw another one at me, throw another one at me, throw another one. I know how to back off that so I can take on what's coming at me right now. They're not walking on eggshells. They know they can take on life and everything it's going to throw at them. So when you see them when they're elders, they're so well put together. And that's what Taoism was about. We can talk about performance, which I love talking about performance. I take my herbs for performance and recovery. I'd like taking my chi herbs to help animate myself. You know astragalus really well. Astragalus is one of the most beautiful herbs. When you cultivate chi in your body, you cultivate your spleen and your lungs so you can harvest the breath and harvest the food and you can harvest the water and harvest the sunlight and imbue yourself with this spark of life. It's the spark in the machine that animates thoughts and emotions, but it's a chop wood, carry water, keeps you going. Great, you get more animation, you get greater vitality every day. But it's all about the expression of that shiny diamond of your heart and your personality and that more infinite aspect of yourself, the Shen. They're the three treasures: the Jing, wax of the candle; Qi, the flame; Shen, the light coming off. And that's going to take a whole life of chop wood, carry water and staying within a sustainable system so that you're not leaking your Jing. That's like leaking your superannuation, 401k, wherever you are. And so you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh crap, I got nothing left, man. And that's your Jing essence. Qi, you start actually making good investments. You start actually going, I know how to actually get into some syntropic principles here, some synergy, not just breath equals this much energy, this breath and this food and this at this time of year, and then 1 + 1 + 1 = 100, and you start getting into good investment technology, right? That's your chi. And then you get to 70 and 80 and you meet these people and their Shen's alive. They haven't been stomped out. Nothing was going to stop them integrating life lessons. And that's all that Chinese herbalism was about. And so when I was reading that in uni in my last year, I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to let another university degree teaching me Chinese medicine, even though it's good for some people, that path, scud up this muse that I was feeling. And, that was nothing had met the muse of my own intent of why I wanted to go forth in herbal medicine. And that Stephen Buhner, he's the guy who got me really onto spring water. And there's the quote I want to read you guys soon when we get into water. That same energy that they just hit that thing I was feeling, that intention, that seed idea, and that's become my work, and that's become SuperFeast. And it's a good lesson for everyone. And the challenges in business is when I stopped listening to that seed idea. I'd either gone to the mindset that the juvenile mindset I had around the seed idea, I'm feeling that, therefore screw the system, I'm going to go forward. That wasn't the muse. The muse is what I was actually feeling. Or the other thing that kind of scuds it up is I can still feel the muse, but we're this size business now and you got to get on with business. All right, mate, things are changing. And that's true. That's true. But it's but that structure and the way you approach it needs to be an appropriate ecosystem for that muse to emerge. That's been the biggest lesson. It's been a hard, beautiful lesson. It's difficult to put in principles like that allow an ecosystem to emerge, like a wild ecosystem to emerge, rather than just defaulting to hierarchical because like, oh gosh, let's not be naive anymore. We're never actually going to do it. It's really, that's been really difficult. But, you go to like Nick Cave. Have you ever read Nick Cave's like My Muse Is Not a Horse?
No.
It's like, it's nothing. I wrote it, like I read it out to my team when we had our last offsite last year, March 1, that's SuperFeast year. It's called Our Immortal Dragon when we go away. And you read it was like when he got nominated for the MTV Awards, like song, pin it up against others. And he goes, look, my muse is not a horse. It's not here to be put up against other artists and race it. My muse is, it frightens easily and it might run off. And it's like, it's such a beautiful way to relate to a business.
Yeah, cool.
And it keeps it, it's so great. Yeah.
Well, if there is something for the listeners as well, and Mace touched on this not long ago, but if you do want a book that is going to be very easy to read, practical, that you can put into play on a daily basis, and this is something I talk about so much, especially when it comes to athletics, is read the book Chop Wood, Carry Water, because it just brings you back to basics and it lets you understand that if you do the basics very, very well, you will be elite at anything you do, but you have to do the basics. Like doing the 1% is cool, but do the 99% first and do it very well, and you'll probably be in the top 1% in the world in whatever you do. So Chop Wood, Carry Water, great book to read, very easy read, short and sharp.
Hell yeah.
Highly
I
recommend.
was thinking too, when you're talking about that, the way the study and everything's changed, when you go back to the basics, so when you go back and look at the origins of TCM and Ayurvedic and all that sort of stuff, and you go back and have a look at history of botany and everything on Earth, you'll start to find the patterns and the similarities between them, which is the bigger lessons. And so rather than where it gets developed, we get into this position in modern society where people want to get the summary. They want to get the breakdown. So what are you telling me this for? They don't want the discussion. They don't want to get into that point of wisdom where we realize that once you know a certain amount, you realize how little you know. And that's a big point where people don't actually want to discuss that because they want us to be able to say the science is settled or this myth's been debunked or we have a straight out, this is how it is, these are the rules, this is the policy, this is our structure, this is our system. They don't want to get into the point where it's like, oh, it's a little bit of a grey area, it's all fuzzy logic, no one really knows everything, you can't possibly know everything. Anyone that thinks they've got a hero that's an expert that knows everything or is close to knowing everything, they're kidding themselves. That's when we get stuck into the imposter syndrome. We start having discussions around ego versus soul, of where we're going to go with this sort of information. Mm-hmm. But when you take it all back, you sound dumb. Like you sit there and go, all of a sudden you're speaking very generalist instead of specialist. You're talking on bigger systems and everything starts to simplify right down. And you start to find the similarity patterns between TCM, Ayurvedic, Western herbalism, and then every other little cultural isolated medicine system with enough time. They come across similarities and share concepts. And that's the big picture if we can kind of get that story across. And even if you have a look at herbal medicine, if you consider that, depending on what your belief systems and that might be, but at one stage as a scientist we're talking about that everything was in one landmass. So if everything was in one place, there's that old herbalist concept of the Pangea concept where everything was in Pangea. Every bit of medicine was found on one place, and then it got split up with a shifting of tectonic plates that created continents, that then created cultures, that then created a cultural form of medicine. But if you consider that these things were not all available, for example, I don't know if we mentioned on the podcast, we talk so much, but there was no tomatoes in India, so no tomatoes in Italy. There was no chilies in India. So we talk about these old school medicine systems and food therapy systems. But if we consider there was a time where Indian food had no chili, or Italian food had no tomato. So what was their
from Mexico
food? Yeah, exactly. So
or Central America.
So until that we had the Spanish go over and bring it all back. There was none of that stuff. And apparently it was something like for the first 50 years, tomatoes in Italy were revered as ornamental. They didn't even eat them. You know, so it's funny to think that people go, what I think I know about a medicine system, or this is what we've been doing for a long time. It's like, hang on, let's go back, even take the layers off, you know? So, and then all of a sudden you see these similarities between it, which is basically living with nature, eating with the systems, as seasons, local, fresh, all that sort of stuff.
And isn't that what you did after you did your naturopath degree or whatever it may be called? You went back and then you immersed yourself back up where you're from, up in Mackay, and then did some work with the elders up there and figured out a bunch of cool stuff up there.
Yeah. We just tried to learn anything from anyone without the bias of what did the science say. What the worst thing is naturopath college, to be perfectly honest, I took so long to unlearn everything because we got brainwashed into believing that things have to be a published medical science. Or
you got to be careful with that, because you got to be careful with how deeply it gets in. Everyone just goes, look, I'll do it, then I'll just, and then I'll unlearn it. And sometimes it's so insidiously in that it's changing neurology. You got to be very mindful of that.
So hard to unlearn. The funny thing is too, is it's a crazy situation when we consider we go through all these years of schooling and you're rewarded for your ability to be brainwashed. So the best students are the ones that can hear something and repeat it over and over again, or read something and never forget it and be able to repeat it. Quick recall. So
and the thing is as you said, you go back to like a source intention. You can go back always, whether it's Pangea, you can feel there's a hum and a beat under all of these systems, and these systems are structuring themselves in certain ways in order to capture and express that source intention as we go along. And so, from the Tao perspective, it's like we know that so much degenerating is unnecessary. And and you can look at every single healing system. Some of them tilt a little bit more towards the spiritual and kind of try to ignore the physical. But even then, the physical, they feel that you can heal the physical through the spiritual. So it's still a way of structuring that same intention. There's so much unnecessary degeneration that distracts from our spiritual growth and distracts from us playing our role in society, playing our role to ourselves, and really like shining that diamond so that we can spiritually stay connected and do our job to keep it going. We want to keep vital. There's always little energy boosting herbals or energy boosting, like original acupuncture. There's always things like the original gua sha stones before there was Chinese medicine, breaking off those little hard bits of calcification that come about if you get a trauma there and it inflames and, it's harder now. All right, let's get some rocks in there and let's make sure that there's some kind of flow so that some vitality and capacity to do my chop wood, carry water goes. So that's a source idea. Yeah. And then always at the source idea is for men and for women, for boys, for girls, for whoever, to really go through the stages of development and become the best you can be. Take on the responsibility that is innate, that you can feel, that allows you to be a great contribution. It's a source idea of medicine and healing. Yeah. And you watch the structures come up, capturing it in different ways as we evolve. And that's the reason we're evolving is because we have gotten so good at keeping us healthy and alive in some ways, and then we explode and explore the structure and we go, well, we're right. We've got it here, not realizing if you go back and connect to the source, the core source, you realize, first of all, we're all connected to the same source intention. The do no harm. Yeah, that's kind of capturing even like a smidge of it. But watch when a system becomes ossified and crusty. And we need to do that, going back to earth medicine, going back to like old school classical Taoist medicine, being like, we've found the way. And it's like, oh God, no, you can't do that, because then you're just going into your own ossified box, your own little religious dogma of healing. And well, how do you remember that, bridge it to the modern times, stay really connected classically, so you're not just taking a scalpel to an old school wisdom tradition and taking what works and then just becoming a part of the ossified Western healing system that is really disconnected from roots. How do you do that? That takes a lot of tending of the harp. And then when you realize we're all working with the same muse, as well as our own muse, it becomes really liberating. And that's like, I had to get into comedy. I was so deep in the wellness world, and I was such an extremist as well. And well, I wasn't really extremist. I kind of fell into like really believing my stage persona a lot, which I'm grateful it wasn't really the Instagram kind of style, because like it was just my stage persona. I wasn't talking shit. I'd really watch it. I was really grateful. I really watched it, and I didn't try and coerce people into doing what I was doing. Like, I was pretty much a raw vegan, And it worked so well for me, and I loved it, and I could talk about it in a way why it was working for me and talk to people who were doing other things. But in my head, I was going like, oh my God, if everyone just ate like me, it would be so much better. The world would be so, like, I'm so glad I didn't go down that route. But I indoctrinated myself. So it's not, I didn't go and do university and do TCM, but I fell into the chaos world of, of trying to like connect back to ancient intention and connecting to the elements. I'm glad I did. It was a great university, and you have to treat it like a university. But then I had to go and like find my footing solo as well after that. That's why I got into comedy. It was the only thing that was going to be like my like be able to like help me integrate that. And
that's
then
crazy that that's such a common theme with a lot of people that have got something really important to say, that we'll do it through comedy. Why is that, do you think? Do you think it's like, is it something about us that wants us to like, just try to put a bit of humour into it, so take the pressure off us with our strong opinions? If we do it like, oh, I was only joking. Anyway, if you get offended,
well, I think it comes back to the dark you were talking about.
Take the pressure off other people, and or turn up with love and light.
Oh, and the comedic aspect, when you come up against the dark, a lot of people were like, well, we're not allowed to go and talk about that. We're not allowed to talk about the difference between carnivore and vegan, or like there's like so many invisible places within comedy. You're like, oh, this is dirty and seedy. I bet you there's something in here, and you find these connective points, and you find the charge, and ideally you find the charge in yourself first, like the offended charge in yourself, and you take the piss relentlessly out of yourself. And then for me, this is my path anyway, then I started kind of cutting myself down, which was like really liberating me. And actually,
was great.
Especially as you go slowly down that route of really like falling in love with yourself, like at the pure and the purest space, and and always the barometer is just like watching how much love is pouring out of you as you go through that discovery. For me, to whether I'm like, am I just like, naively kind of like cuddling myself and being like, you're a winner, or am I actually really like, really in love with myself? And sometimes you realize that whole wellness kick was actually you just covering up your own psychological shit that you've had, and you decided, no, I'm just going to become a winner and a know-it-all this way, rather than going and realizing, like how much you've packed over it, because when your parents divorced, you really made that decision. I don't want to go and I don't know, like, I'm definitely don't want to go into that psychology thing. It's getting covered heavily at the moment, but good. It's getting, why that vice was there, like why. We were just mentioning the the tomatoes and the chilies and all that kind of stuff. Like the book, The Drunk Botanist, covers all of that so much. And like for me, I'm like, like you go back and you go like, okay, well, why when I was a kid was I using alcohol? What was I covering up? And why did I then go into a wellness trend that glorified me not ever touching anything and being scared? There's eating disorders and drinking disorders that are there, rife through all of naturopathy, all of wellness, all veganism, all carnivore, all of it is just rife. Some people, to their credit, are just having a great time exploring dietary extremes, and you can see the gleam in their eye, and they're like, yeah, and you bag them out about it. They're like, yeah, I am an asshole. And they're like, and that's the way that you want to be. And don't project it onto everyone else, and don't gain their own validation through being like, yeah, see, I've got this pack of hyenas that are going, yeah, yep, 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 who are like more like chihuahuas, yep, 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 you're right, you're right, you're right. And so when you do kind of realize that, oh my God, I do have to go through an unlearning of my own process that I've gone through and reintegrate. Comedy is amazing because it helps you just ease into those little dark areas and that are really uncomfortable. And, and also it's like, I don't enjoy triggering people. I enjoy that there's some people like, it's just me resharing what I went through. It's just what comes naturally. I don't think I'm saving anyone, but it's really cool having chats with people. They're like, oh my God, man, like
storytelling.
I was so pissed at you when you were pointing out this part of this part of my psyche. It was that, and I was like, that's what I was like with a guy in Sydney. And I was like, stop looking at me. And you can see my reliance on this dogma too much. And slowly but surely, you're showing up with love. You're showing up consistently, and people are like, oh God, this guy's just an asshole. And then looking at other areas, it's like you go into the podcast and be like, okay, no, it's not just asshole bagging out stuff. It's just like you can see all of a sudden where comedy falls within the ecosystem. And it's like, if you're charged, if it's really hateful, you can see. so rarely comedy is coming from a place of like real hate, and it doesn't actually get out there. Generally, it's coming from a place of like real lived experience, and someone's willing to be like, you know what's interesting, or you know what's sad, and it's like, oh my God, you actually can't get more vulnerable. Like, screw the like time to get vulnerable babes post. No, go watch someone who's like finding the funny in that thing that actually hurt them the most and actually freaked them out the most about their path. Wonderful. Like that's it. That's what the comedy does.
That is so cool. Well, for me, I know that like, we touched on this just before, but we were talking about doing the basics and doing the basics really, really well. So Maddie and I talk a lot about, you know, we get asked questions a lot about sleep and water and how to get the most out of our body, whether we're trying to be the best partner possible, the best business person possible, or the best athlete possible. We're looking to enhance these areas, these basic needs that we need is breath. We're trying to enhance breath. We're trying to enhance sleep. We're trying to enhance the nutrition we take on. And we're trying to enhance the water and hydration. There's some things that are key that we've found over the course of time that just keep popping up when we're talking about diversity there is, you know, we like our sprouted foods, we like our fermented foods. And I think a big part of that is, and it's probably going to become more prominent and prolific sooner rather than later, and it probably in your space it has a lot, is medicinal mushrooms. So adding that into, you know, anybody's, you know, daily basics. For you, if someone was to say, hey Mace, I am looking at enlightening myself, I'm looking to become more spiritual, I'm looking to become a better person, and they said, I want something from your SuperFeast range that you would start me on, number one, what is something that you would recommend to them and why?
Oh yeah. Start with the Jing formula, always. We like to go for a tear through the Jing herbs just to see if there's any little like, you know, gaps in the way that your chi's flowing. Like just if you get a rush of energy, and you might to begin with, and then you'll, you know, and then it'll lessen pretty quick, or you may continue to find your body is like, oh my God, gobble, 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 and that'll show that maybe you do have a bit of a Jing deficiency. And so you...
Or a leak.
A big leak.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so like everyone's walking around just like pissing Jing out of their kidneys, out the back. That's always where we start. At least tear through a 100-gram jar, you know, and then the amount of times people will feel, let's just say like they just feel the essence within their kidneys, especially if they're going standing barefoot. And they're like, what the hell? Because they're used to things medicating them or treating a symptom. And then there's a little bridge with tonic herbalism and these kinds of adaptogens, especially when they're sourced a way that's so closely aligned with an old tradition, which for us is Didao, which goes back to 2,000-year-old texts. There's like, if you want to get the herb that has, you know, they're the duck's nuts, you got to get them from this rocky crag region in this province. This is the microclimate. And then now we've had this Didao system emerge. So it's like, how do you ensure that that's as closest to its original genetics and original kind of personality, which means, you know, like it go as far as making sure that the mushroom spore, or the seed, of the rhizome is always sourced from the exact same microclimate in which it's growing. And it can't be domesticated.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Cool. Can I give a great analogy for the Jing that I've used to explain to people before? Because with most disease states that we see, you know, that in the medical world, they talk about it toxicity or deficiency or something. But in a lot of my naturopathic belief, it's we've either got a overflowing cup or an empty cup. You know, and so a lot of the adaptogens, I'll use the analogy of putting a lid on the cap. A little on the cup. So we'll stop you overflowing and that sort of stuff. Overflowing with anxiety, overflowing with that, or being deficient and weak. Where the Jing builds you a bigger cup. So rather than having an overflowing cup that either overflows and then goes empty with no middle ground, building up that kidney Jing builds up a bigger cup so you can actually take more on, hold more, have more essence and more vitality rather than just putting a cap on it, you know? And that's where you'll feel that actually that you can build more, hold more, and you are more when you actually build up that particular energy.
And how would you, if we're leaking that, how do you band-aid that? How do you stop it from leaking as much? Is it about taking more of the stuff, or is it about just filling up the leak and just trying to, like, you know, it's like I see that as like a boat that's sinking. You're just the water's coming in, you're just like trying to get it out, but we would rather patch it and make sure that we're, you know, doing the thing that's going to stop those things from leaking out. How would you do that as best way possible?
There is a two-prong approach. So there are, like I developed this, I thought I knew how to deliver tonic herbs, and then I went and did 3 years at the markets in the Northern Rivers, talking to mums, talking to execs, talking to teenagers, talking to people who had crippling anxieties, people who were just like thriving athletes taking it. And so the multitude of ways for them to integrate these herbs into, what their most core intention is at the time, that's what I realized. And that's why these have to be decentralized herbs, because they're meeting people in the place where they're most vulnerable. Say, the very first woman I ever gave the mushrooms to. So now I'm over on the, the Mason's mushrooms, which that'd be the 2-prong. Short term, if everyone's like, just shut up and tell me. It was like Jing and Mason's mushrooms. Yeah. Just go and take those 2. That's the easiest starting point. It's going to cover the most bases for you and get you involved. But this woman, Trish, I was awkward about selling things, but she got me like, just shut up and just give me the mushrooms, all right, asshole. And then I was like, okay, cool. And then for her, 4 kids, 2 of them were autistic, and, she's just going through it. So I'm not going to go and, she's also trying, to upgrade lifestyle things, but she's going through it. She needs Band-Aids, and she needs good herbal friends, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's it for her. And maybe you cultivate enough, she's going to find for her, maybe it's just this time of life and she's taken on a lot, or maybe there is a linchpin belief and that she can, and then she has the capacity and the jing to actually go make a massive alteration. Regardless, that for her, that's a beautiful time to be like, now having young kids, let alone that situation, it's going to leak jing. In Chinese medicine, we all know that the birthing a baby, let alone having young kids, is the time when you're going to be sleep deprived, and it doesn't matter how many not looking at blue light nights you have, it's going to be broken. And so you get the good mates in, you get your jing herbs in, and you support yourself that way, and that's a beautiful way to do it. Then you go a little bit further along, and there are the people who aren't listening. Maybe someone who's just like working in the high rise, and for some people that's incredible. There's people who love working in high rises, and they're smashing chi herbs and neural nectar, and they're just like, I love how this helps me perform. But there's the other ones who I need to get on these adaptogens because I just really hate my job and my life. It's just like that's the one who is using this like a supplement rather than a herbal friend that is actually, helping you, tap into your deepest intention. The best thing about these herbs, though, and for some people, they're like, especially if you go into the Shen herbs, like reishi mushroom, the Shen blend, it's harder you don't hear it. We don't share these testimonials because you got to put so much context into it. But people get onto reishi and be like, oh, I just thought I was taking like a lung tonic that was going to be like immunological and help my hepatic function. And all of a sudden I had the biggest insight of my career was killing me, and I really need to make a shift right now. And that's kind of the difference between a jing herb, using it as a jing herb as a supplement. It will support you to get, you can still ignore the nudges from the universe until it sends you a Mack truck. But at least if it sends the Mack truck, you got a lot of jing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a really good way of putting it. And so for Mason's mushrooms, break down what's in that and tell us a little bit about how you created that and how you formulated that.
Yeah, I mean, like Mason's mushrooms, all the formulas were like little downloads.
Yep.
Had a good friend who I had the formula there. My favorite shagarishi, lion's mane, cordyceps, shiitake, maitake, poria. This is an incredible mushroom that doesn't get enough attention.
Please tell us more.
Fu Ling. It's in nearly every single longevity formula that the Taoist tonic herbs, it was the Taoist herbalists were using. It's a spleen tonic. It dredges water. It's a slight diuretic, but it regulates dampness. And especially everyone knew that if you have damp spleen, spleen is soil in the body, and you can feel into that digestive capacity and feel into the element and the feel of fluffy, what you want to be fluffy soil. So feel that area where your stomach and your spleen and your pancreas are, and imagine your hands going down and, is that soil is it bacterially rich? Can you feel the mycology in there? Can you feel the worms are happy, or can you feel you put your fingers in and it's like it's wet and it's slimy, or is it dry and cracky? And you can start. This is the whole nature of classical Chinese medicine versus traditional Chinese medicine. In order to be a classical Chinese herbalist, you need to be able to animistically be able to travel through the yin yang. So it's the yin and the yang of the spleen qi, which is the soil qi, or the water qi of the kidneys, the hot, the cold, or the wood, and you don't go beyond that. You work on yin yang, and you work on wuxing.
Yep.
And that's another one of Rhonda Chang's books. If anyone's like, how do I discover this? Get Rhonda Chang's 2 books, Yin Yang Wuxing. That's it.
Yeah.
That's where you live. And that's decentralized medicine. The reason, like you were talking about being able to, I think earlier you were talking about a naturopath and a tradie having chats, so to like make that information really accessible. It's the same with, Einstein saying, if you can't explain to a 6-year-old, you don't get it. Mm-hmm. And that's the nature, and that's what's scary being a classical Chinese, a classical healer, is that you are in every time you will get people feeling. Can you feel that soil now?
Yeah.
And this is where Poria comes into it, because Poria is helping, and majority of people are experiencing that damp sogginess, and it's mostly because it's our capacity to digest not only things foods we're putting in, excessive sugars or carbs or proteins or fats or whatever, colorings, whatever it is. It's all the ideas that we're needing to digest, all the ideologies and all the ideas been thrown, so it's all clogged up and gets soggy because we're not actually moving it through. Pori is one of those ones that help us move that chi. And
combines well with astragalus too. Astragalus for the others, because astragalus does our upright chi.
Have we got chi?
Our spleen.
No. There's astragalus here. Oh, we don't. Yeah.
Oh, we got astrag here. Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Astragalus is so good because it does the spleen chi energy, helps you to stand tall, confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, singing, the upward energy that holds everything up and out, controls your lymph and everything, and works beautifully with it. I'll tell you another little tip about astragalus, and I say astragalus, but the Americans always get mad at me saying it's astragalus.
Astragalus?
So astragalus, but we're in
Those
Australia,
damn
so it's astragalus. Galaz. So anyway, but we always used to use astragalus for any viral infection that affected the heart and everything like that, to protect the heart and then all that, again, through that lymph. So astragalus.
Have you had the chi formula? Chi formula is, astragalus, codonopsis, poria, and white atractylodes, like leading the charge, with a bit of turkey and gynostemma sitting in there with a bit of jujube kind of on the back end.
The other thing is the doctrine of signature with these things. So we're talking about basics, taking the layers off. You go all the way back, and it's so funny because this, when you say you got to know it well enough to explain it to a 6-year-old, this is the problem. Adults think they're too smart. And we got to use big words just to satisfy them, to make us sound more scientific, where the reality of is you're better off explaining it like a 6-year-old would. It looks like this, it probably does these things. Like button mushrooms, the agaricus, looks like little boobs, and they work on man boobs, know. We got things like the oyster mushroom, it looks like the lungs and that sort of stuff. We got all these doctrine of signatures. Chaga, really good for the guts and looks like a piece of poo. You know what I mean? So that's what, you got to find those.
What else does it look like? What does it go and tackle, like black masses in the body?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm, so I think it's so fascinating over these things. Oh, what
astragalus looks like a lightning bolt, and that's exactly what chi is. And it's the absolute prime chi tonic in the whole Taoist tonic herbal system. In the entire system, it's the one you talk to a lot of Taoist masters. If they can pick one herb, they'll often pick Shazandra because it works on all 3 treasures and yin yang wuxi, all 5 elements or transitions. But their astragalus is the one that they don't ever stop because the chi tonics are the chop wood, carry water that enable you to go on. Because when you have a tonic that's actually such a potent regulator of chi, nothing regulates the entire body more than a chi tonic. So if even though it's a high chi tonic, it's saving resources in so many areas that it will build blood. And then when you build blood, this is the idea behind Chop Wood, Carry Water. When you read that book, the biggest challenge is when you are going about your work and you have your moments of insight and you discover the unification of everything and you have these moments of enlightenment. If your blood isn't strong enough, then you will attach to that enlightenment moment and you will turn that into your current religion or worldview rather than being able to leave it behind, because the Shen travels on the blood. And so this is why we have such a focus on chi builders and for women blood builders. That's the I am Gaia formula, so that they can constantly have that strong blood. Because look at anyone who's susceptible to dogma, anyone's got a weak mind, have got weak blood in classical Chinese medicine. And so that's my revolution and evolution and the contribution. I feel like SuperFeast is like a weed. It's like a dandelion. We're just looking for those cracks in the concrete. Or that, you let that one part of that very well manicured garden go to the wild, that one little corner, we're going to grow.
Yeah.
We're going to grow out from that, and you're not going to be able to stop the mushrooms, and you will not stop these wild tonic herbs. And that's why they need to be grown wild. That's why they need je ne sais quoi. That's why when we grow these herbs, when people like, I love how many other mushroom companies are out there at the moment. We started 12 years ago, and there were people like Dragon Herbs, like Ron Teagarden, who were like paving the way for me, and George Lamoureux, and like magical. I thought there was no room in the market for me.
No.
Like 12 years ago. That's how much of a good businessman I am. But then like they were like, no, dumbass. You know, the mushrooms are like, dude, do it. And it was mothers like Trish that were just like, stop talking about these things and sending me to some American site. Like, you know, like, why? Just you get them. And I was like, oh gosh, I can't. And I did. Like very quickly. That was like a beautiful, I didn't have to try. Did not have to try. It was all just like, it was just all flowing with us. But I can't even remember what I was talking about then. But it was something about the blood, something about that source, and something about, you know, anyway, I don't know where I was going with it, but we started with
With adequate
astragalus.
chi and jing and everything, we can achieve all of these things, I think, is basically
Well,
the
and
message.
but that's the entire nature of it. I mean, like you'd never know. Like, why would I take these herbs? I'm like, to be honest, I don't know. Sometimes, like, it's little. Those are the best ones, and you know, I don't know. I'm interested sometimes how many people get those clicks. For some people, they've already got their big pops in other areas, so you're not going to get a massive cathartic experience from these tonic herbs, and you'll be like, wow, that's what I was talking about. The way, you know, when these mushrooms are sourced, I love how many people are coming out, you know, at the moment, because there is this revolution. But when people try and figure out the difference between, like, well, are your mushrooms that much different to mine? I'm like, yeah, they are, because the water that we grow them with is wild water. That's why we're in the crags. That's not. I'm not saying that we're you know, that we're DAO, and I'm not growing organic. Because, like, organic, you need to go to these big sheds near these big industrial areas using municipal water. You can't get that when you're doing DAO. You can't go organic when you're DAO, because we're using so many little micro farms. Are the practices organic? They are so way beyond organic. There's no pesticides in sight. These people revere these herbs. How do you know? How's it regulated? Well, first of all, we're TGA listed. We have we have testing on site up there. We've got 2 TGA tests going in here and little TGA listings. So we got, like, there's no pesticides, there's no heavy metals, there's none of that. But it's the water. It's the water, the ecology, the astrology. You know, the stardust that's coming down on them when you grow them that way.
I have to ask you about something in particular, though, that just wigs me out forever and always has, and that's cordyceps. So with cordyceps being that zombie mushroom, so with cordyceps will go and find a host or a creature that it will grow it on certain soil, and it'll, like, kill the thing and pop out of it. So when we're looking at about the soil, and we're looking at the water, and we're looking at the location, with Cordyceps sinensis, I mean, that's typically the original wildcrafted one that could be growing out of a variety of different hosts. They've got a new one, the Cordyceps militaris, where they just try to have a consistent slurry to grow it out of. But how do you get consistency with the Cordyceps sinensis? Are there certain markers, or do you want them out of certain insects, or are they?
Yeah, I mean, that one, you can't. We can get Cordyceps sinensis wild. It's, you know, like a jar like this is like $3,000 or $4,000 if we do that. I didn't want to do, because I was kind of such a purist in the beginning, and this is also the difference I realized between, sometimes I've got an idea of what I want it to look like, and and then the business has another idea at times. But I was like, well, I'm not going to do Cordyceps because I'm only going to do pure DAO. And then everyone demanded it so much, so I was like, all right, cool, I'm going to look. There's Militaris, there's CS4. They're the basic 2 angles that you can go down. I tried them both for a long time. I really liked Militaris. I don't like the growing mediums. I don't want grain involved. At least CS4, it's a strain taken off a wild cordyceps, and we have we have a broth that we grow it in. So we've got a little tank that we grow that in, and it's funnily. Every time I talk to anyone who there's studies, but I try not to lean on the studies, but there are some good studies showing that the outcomes of CS4 versus Militaris are so close. The CS4 is so close to the wild Cordyceps sinensis, where the Militaris is almost like a different herb, still incredible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whereas the CS4, I wouldn't think it, looking at the way that you take a particular strain and then you're growing that in a broth, I wouldn't think that it would have those outcomes, but it did, and I've taken it for a long time. A lot of athletes and a lot of people who are going through, like, mostly it's people who are probably over like 65 and 70, who were the ones like back at the markets that were like, please, like I really need cordyceps, and I'd get a batch and I'd put them on it and they were like, oh my God, that's just what I needed, you know?
Well, it's
Yeah.
funny you say that because I did hear recently, and I don't know how much validity this has, but I heard that cordyceps actually does some wonders for AKK.
Oh yeah, Akkermansia growth.
Yeah,
Nice.
so
A lot of these herbs work. This is another thing I wanted to ask you because there's so much actually I want to talk. We're gonna have to do this a lot more often because I've got so many other questions I wanted
Should
to
we
ask
do a
you.
regular
We
spot?
should.
Oh,
we
we
should.
should do
Yeah,
a thing
definitely.
because as a naturopath, you know, some of the craziest rules that we get taught. They're just that we have to unlearn. You know, for example, I could never understand. They always, when they do candida diets, they'd prescribe someone and say, so you got to avoid mushrooms when you got candida. So you got a fungal overgrowth. We've got to avoid all fungus. It's like, well, you don't have button mushrooms or oyster mushrooms growing in your tummy. But I also understand when I research these mushrooms, a lot of the mushrooms are antifungal. Plus, they tend to grow in places that fungus grows. So if they didn't have antifungal stuff, how would they compete with those around them? Those sort of crazy rules that you hear about when to avoid mushrooms. And the other one that drives me insane as a naturopath is the FODMAP diets, where we're looking at these mushrooms full of polysaccharides, which is the P and the FODMAP. So, oh, you can't have these things because you've got this dysbiotic overgrowth of bacteria and fungus and mold. And then we go, oh, but these actual herbs or fungus work on those. So do you have to deal with that sort of stuff all the time?
Yeah, I mean, we deal in a world where we are in reality and we realize that sometimes it's useful to acknowledge that maybe in this situation we'll have a straight line.
Yeah.
But if you go into the real world, there's no straight line.
No.
The more I zoom in, this is the best way to think about it, being like, yeah, cool, that's the outline of Australia, and this is how much in distance of meters that it is on the outside of Australia. Then if you get a dog to go down and walk the outline of Australia, well, it gets a little bit longer because they've got a little bit more nuance than a human. Then you get an ant to go and walk the outline of Australia and you increase the distance of Australia once again. There's no linear truth.
Yeah.
And this is the whole nature of having some capacity of what maybe people talk about, you know, like a strong mind or some sovereignty or some ability to hold two opposing ideas at the same time and still function as Fitzgerald lays down.
Well, there's your yin and yang diagram in itself.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the whole premise around
That's
the
the
TCM.
premise.
We got the yin and the yang, and where you got the yang, you got a bit of a yin. So
Oh, look, and it's interesting because you know I've definitely, I'm probably there in certain ways, maybe talking about business where I don't understand the nuance yet, so I'm holding on to a linear idea, but I also understand and I've cultivated the practice to where I know when it's the appropriate time to let go of an idea, and I don't try and stuff that idea while I'm using it to integrate the actual truth and the source of the thing down other people's throats. I will have a conversation once I've let go of that being a universal truth. But, you know, I've made my mistakes with that. So when I'm talking to people, and you can see in one way, they're a robot of a system being taught a rote rule, and they're going, you know, I had someone recently on a live be like, this person, it's not for this person, that was saying that the pharmacist was just like, reishi is a yang tonic that you shouldn't have every day, beep, beep, boop. I was just like, they're like, is there any truth in that? And I was just like, my God. The fact that there is this person slinging these truths about a yin tonic without even giving the person the time of day to have a nuanced conversation and explain the source of that, of why they were referring to it as yang when it is in overall a yin tonic. Were they referring to what they have happened to seen, or their textbook used the case study that someone who had say a hot liver took an excessive amount of reishi and that exacerbated something that is the heat, not the yang or something like that, but rather these people, these 2-minute noodle experts, sling these facts around, and because they want clickbait in real life, they're like, lording over everyone with my fact, and I don't have time to talk about it, I'm a busy pharmacist, and they're like run away from the actual nuanced conversation. Power to them. And it's hard talking to a lot of people when you and I avoid it now. It's why I've got, you know, I just enjoy teasing a little bit, to be honest, if I'm dealing with a robot. Or in what I've had to do for 10 years, I've had to, like, probably the first 6 years of the business, I've had to sit in people like acupuncturists coming hard at me, bang, 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 how dare you, bro? And just been like, hey, do you want to come on a live with me?
Yeah.
I'm gonna jump. How about you give me your number? Let's jump on a call.
Yeah.
And some of those have become best customers of SuperFeast because they're like, you know what? And sometimes they point out things that I wasn't acknowledging as well. And that's what I needed, was to understand how to communicate to my community. When is the real appropriate time in using these tonic herbs? And especially when you start going into those areas where there is symptomology, how do you really start to lightly tread through what's an appropriate dose and what's an appropriate thing that you would want to be feeling, even if it's not great and it's adverse against your symptoms, how you would take that. Because these tonic herbs are very gentle. You're not going to do damage to yourself. As long as you're taking a small amount, maybe that flushes up a little symptom that you take to your acupuncturist or your naturopath, and then you've actually got inside clues of what's going on. And that's often what leads you to understanding what was going on and bridging over to that clinical world and living in that phase. And so I'm really grateful to those acupuncturists that, and Chinese medicine practitioners and naturopaths that had at least they had the respect of their craft to sit down and like really help me learn. And then likewise, those who are like, this guy has nothing of value. This guy is running around in a singlet, barefoot, with a bloody, like a samurai bun on his head, with like often like with a necklace, with a reishi necklace, just going, whoop, 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 just talking about whatever I want. And they'd be like, and then they'd sit down and be like, holy shit, this guy's sat in this world for a long time. And I'm not budging. I'm not like, you can talk. I'm having fun learning a lot of things that I'm not an expert at the moment. But you come at me with tonic herbalism and the right that humans have and always have, like, had to bring them into their home, heal themselves, cultivate themselves, really understand that the hearth of our body is something that we have this cornucopia of healing mechanisms and relationships in the natural world and the universal world to have relationship with, to teach us. So do what we're meant to do here is learn shit, integrate shit, have fun with it. You're going to say I'm not allowed to have access to astragalus because sometimes maybe it locks their fox in the hen house if there's a viral infection. That's a very easy conversation to have. If you've got these symptoms, don't take chi herbs. Done. I make it and now I've done that. Now you approve of me putting astragalus on the shelves? Yeah, well, as long as you're doing that. Well, what? You were going to sacrifice everyone having access to astragalus because you were just like, well, fuck it. Let's just take it off the board because maybe 1 in 10,000 people will take it at an inappropriate time because they're too silly to realize that when they've been sick, maybe I'll just rest and not try and throw darts blindly at something. So you're going to deny everyone who is having miraculous results with astragalus just because of this one little scenario in your clinic that you've seen, your textbook talked about. It's so selfish, and I really, really love when practitioners are able to not go down that route and they have that dedication of bridging from where they are. They realize they're not the be all end all of the structure, and they watch and smile as they bridge over the empowerment of people who come into their clinic to integrate healing aspects into their own life so they never have to come back into the clinic again, only when it really gets out of hand. And then they come back and they're like, my God, look at you. Look at how much you've learned how to tend to yours and your family's body and your life. Can I give you some advice here? Can I give you some advice there? You're doing amazing.
That's perfect.
They hit you with a food culture bit as well. That you got to prove because in Australia, which is awkward when you're in Australia, because you've got to prove this food culture, this traditional food culture. They try to say these things that have been around for thousands of years as teas and soups and stews and broths have no food culture for us to prove any sort of safety. And we're sitting there going, how could you say? But then you realise, they're talking about the post-World War II cookbook here in Australia. And if it's not part of that, then it doesn't exist. And this is what I love about what you're doing, what you have been doing, and everyone else. You're creating the food culture. Because now we actually get enough people doing it with enough education and enough awareness, enough people just forcing it out there and forcing light into that area of darkness that wasn't there. All of a sudden it becomes a food culture, and then people talk about it, we discuss it, we can forage for it, we can harvest it, we can grow it, and then we get the conversation that we need to be able to take control of our own health. And I fucking love that.
Yeah, it's so good. And and I know this is probably going to open up a can of worms here, but before we wrap, because we need to do this again for sure, because I could go for another couple of hours easily.
Should we book in a date?
We should.
Before we leave?
Yeah, I think we should. I just want to touch on briefly for the next couple of minutes, and this is, again, can of worms. Let's just quickly touch on quality of water. Quality of water, getting it from the earth or getting it through our pipes, municipal water, as opposed to spring water as opposed to this? Please tell us. Give us this quote. I need to hear it.
Yeah, it's from Stephen Buhner. I was posting it this morning. And bear with me, maybe not the best podcast material, but it was the only, and I cut it down as much as I could. It's about him going out with his great grandfather, coming in from the city, and this thing that his great grandfather would take him into the wilderness and pass on to him. I think this chapter, we'll put the link to the entire thing because I cut out the first half. I think this, like, it saved my life, my wilderness life, you know, as I was saying, and got me and really thinking about what my father was passing over to me. We reached the pond. We would lie for hours on its banks, the silence a blanket over us. Sometimes we would drop a word into the silence like a stone into the water, and the word's meaning would send ripples through us until they ebbed, slowed, and stopped. Still, even then I knew those words were unnecessary. For in our time together, we were doing something without words that humans have done for millennia. As we lay with the smells and the sounds and the feels of that deep place inside, something would leave his body and enter mine. I would breathe it into me as slowly as I breathed in his smell. Sometimes, in my soul, found purchase in it. It was a food without which I could not have become human. It is always passing in silence between the man and the boy, between the woman and the girl. It is handed down from one interior world to the next. Its essence penetrates the muscles of the body, the oxygen of the blood, the substance of the spirit. And this was the time in which I first tasted wild water. A man's hand possesses touch and touching, softness and hardness, those deep veins on the back that capture the eyes and will not let them go, and all his life written in the lines of his palm. I remember laying back upon my elbows with a piece of grass between my teeth and my great-grandfather leaning forward and cupping his hand, sliding it under the surface of that glassy pond. He lifted the shining surface to my lips and said, "Here, have you ever tasted this water?" I looked at him, askance, and caught the gleam in his eye. Then bent my head, pursed my lips. I remember the translucency of that water, the tiny particles of dirt floating in its depths, and below it all his life written in the palms of his hands. The water was sweet and cooling. My body liked it. As I lifted my head, I caught the glint in his eye, and he made that particularly gritty sound with his teeth as he smiled that I loved so much. "Good, isn't it?" he asked, and I remember nodding. And then we lay back down, and that thing continued to come out of his body into mine. Later, my mother caught me drinking wild water and told me it would kill me, and began to instill in me the fear of the wilderness of nature. And later still, my great-grandfather died, and my days began to be filled with TV dinners and the flickering half-intimacy of television. The years passed, and the voices of my ancestors began to fade from memory. I became used to the taste of domesticated water. It was long and long again before I tasted wild water once more, before the seeds that the land of my great-grandfather had planted within me began their slow growth. And even more years passed before I was no longer afraid wild water would kill me. The journey back to the wild water is a long one. And now, in my turn, I have walked with my son in the deep forest. I have lain next to him and felt something leave my body and enter his. He needs it less often the older he becomes. Still, sometimes he is unsettled and paces the floor, and a particular look comes over him again, agitated. He will ask if he can come lie next to me in the silence I hold him. Something in him opens up, and a food flows out of me and into him. The colour and tone of his skin changes, and his breathing slows and deepens, and eventually he sighs and is filled once more. I know that in his time he will pass this on as it was passed on to me, and perhaps also one day he will bend over and cup his hand and ask his child or grandchild or some child, "Here, have you ever tasted this water?"
That is
Yeah,
cool.
that's wicked. Yeah.
That is amazing.
That does summarise a lot of it, eh?
I think that story saved my life. There was, like, in terms of talking about wild water, and you go into the water wars and people are talking about reverse osmosis or Kangen or spring water or whatever. They're all great conversations. And there's many options, and sometimes it's practical to get wild spring water. Sometimes it's practical just to get a little filter. But the world is so straight lining, and it's really fun running in a straight line world, and we know operating in this civilization. But you travel and go and ask the old codgers and the old duckies, "Is there a spring around here?" You know, you hear them talk. You hear the story of a little wild spring. You know, they go, "Oh yeah, we used to get water up there." Or now you can go to findaspring.com, and they'll tell you where there's springs, and it kind of takes away a little bit of that. You know, there used to be lots and lots, and then people would allow people onto their properties, and then, you know, eventually the word got too far out and people who were like silly billies would come in and ruin it for everyone. And there's some secret ones, you know, and we kind of like, it's a secret society. There are many I'm not allowed to talk about. I don't want to talk about.
Yeah,
and I've had people, good friends, like, dude, stop being an arsehole, tell me. And I'm like, no, you haven't earned it. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper here, but you haven't. I'm like, and I'm not gonna give it to you. Like, you know, you have 2 pair, the whole table knows.
Well, we went to just before we finish off. Number one, I want to lock in a date where we can go to a spring that we can go to together, all together, and get some water and taste some. That would be amazing. The other thing is, when I was in Mexico, we were in Playa del Carmen, we were in Tulum a little bit, and then we met a friend there. Well, we made a friend there, and they took us to a property that is, you can't go to. It's this guy, he owns a lot of land around that area, but he also has this spring in his property, and it's in a cave. You go down, you've probably seen these before, but they're beautiful colors. They have fish in them, and you can go swimming down in these caves, and they go for miles and miles and miles, and you swim in it, but it's the most pristine, clearest water you've ever seen. I'll actually pop a link in some of the photos in this as well, and it is insane. But he said, you're one of a few people that have been here to check this particular one out, and I was just mind blown. So myself and a good friend of mine went down there and had a swim in there, and it was epic. You came out of it feeling like, like there was a bazillion mosquitoes, but once you got out of the jungle area and got into this area of the water, and it was in this cave, you were just like, wow, mind-blowing experience, like epic.
Where the springs are, that's where those like interdimensional layers kind of, you can feel they start to dissolve a little bit, and you don't know, in one way people can like take this literally, or just like the feel of where this storytelling come from, but you like, all of a sudden you're like a little bit closer to that realm of earth spirits and fairies and nature spirits, and you know, you're like, ooh, and that's, you know, and I'm not talking about the water wars where I'm like, you know, like that feeling you had when you went to that wild spring and you had a swim in that, which is, you know, even like sometimes it's rarer still to be at the source. Like, do you ever get that feeling when you're drinking Kangen water?
No, not a chance.
And that's not shitting on Kangen water. It's like a good, for some people, it's really amazing in this civilized world. But like, if you can overcome, because for a lot of people, they will justify the fear that they have of wild water and just be like, no, my allegiance is over here. It's like, oh, screw your allegiance. There's no allegiance here. But all the reasons, you know, like sometimes this stuff seeps into it's deuterium, like heavy water and all that kind of stuff. Screw that. The way that spring water pops out of the ground cold and it's vortexed its way up, and what it's had to run through, the minerals it's had to run through. Oh my gosh, it's charged and it's magical, and nothing's ever going to replace that. And if you just dip a little bit into that realm, and it's a good barometer for how far you've fallen into domestication, and doesn't mean you have to be a complete wild person, but it just checks something in you and make sure that you're not going to be, you know, ultimately, like, look, like a lot of people, there's like almost a split in the genetics going on, and one is a split of people becoming a complete piece of tip-top bread, floppy, you know, iron fortified, and you can watch, you know, going into the metaverse, you can see that floppiness occurring more and more, deeper and deeper, to the extent I feel there's going to be a massive split in the genetics. And one way that you can make sure there's no way in hell my lineage is going to get that is passing that on as Stephen Buhner's, you know, Stephen Buhner's grandfather passed on to him. That's that connection that's invisible to the wild world. Science will like it'll find it someday what biophilia is. It'll find that when you realize there's an aliveness and something that brings you alive. If you stay connected to that spring water world, if you're here, friends, if you're traveling, if you're in Auckland, go and have a look up where that spring is. It pops right out of this vine wall. Go and collect a few bottles. You know, go to the health food store and, you know, see if they've got
That's
little
cool,
bit.
I want to plan my holidays around it.
And that's what you end up doing. And you start, like, you know, to an extent, you know, there's hot springs and then there's like water springs, and you start, you know, when you go to Melbourne, you're like, I can't not go to the Dandenongs. I can't not go up and taste that water, and the water becomes an old friend. And you go and collect enough, and you go, you know, sometimes, you know, for me, you got good mates. I've landed to Sydney, and they're like, you don't have time to go to the Blue Mountains here. Here's a couple of demi-johns to kind of get you.
I was born in Blue Mountains.
Born
there.
Little Blackheath spring
Katoomba, Lura.
Little awesome spring action going on up there.
My grandparents lived up there. Oh, man, that's so cool. We've had such a blast having a chin wag, and I know this episode's gone for an hour and 20 minutes, but it's amazing. And I think we're going to have to do it all again. And
yeah.
I think we could keep going. And I'm sure Matt's got a million
Oh, I
questions.
do.
Yeah, talking about like going into the nuances of each of the herbs and
yeah,
everything.
for
and
sure.
that's-
Oh, I love herbs. They're old mates.
Yeah. So for people that want to find yourself or SuperFeast, IG is the best way to get around it. Just at SuperFeast.
Yep, at SuperFeast, or you can just go straight to superfeast.com.au or superfeast.com if you're in the in Northern Americas.
Sweet. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you picked up some really cool points in episode number 12 of the Phyba Performance Podcast, and we're going to have Mace back, and we'll also talk about our spring water foraging experience next time we do this again.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks a lot.
Yoo-hoo.